broke the camshaft in with the new old stock lifters in my 351 Cleveland powered Mustang. Ran it at 2,000 RPMs for about 15 minutes, and things seemed to go pretty darn well. First, the car wouldn't start. So as it always seems to happen to me, when I pull the distributor out and manually set the timing again, it always takes about 2 tries for me to get it right. The method I use is finding the compression stroke on the number 1 cylinder with a little rag balled up in the spark plug hole. When you bump the motor over with the starter, that rag pops out, you know you're on compression, and you turn the balancer until you get your timing mark, in my case about 18 degrees. And then you line up your rotor with the distributor cap for that number 1 cylinder. It's a pretty easy method to do, but it always seems to work for me on the second try. You know, when you're firing a cam up for the first time, you don't want to be starting the engine and spinning the starter over, spinning it, trying to get it to start. You want to avoid that if at all possible. Because the whole thing about the break-in is you want to start that engine up, don't let it idle, and rev it at the 2,000 RPMs or so it gets all the oil pressure. So yeah, that was a little nerve-wracking, I'm not gonna lie. But things seem to have gone just fine. There were no weird knocks, no noises. I think we would have known. But I'll be draining the oil tomorrow and putting in the regular oil. I got the driven high zinc 10W40, which is what Isky recommended. They do not recommend the Valvoline VR1 high zinc oil, which I had been running previously, so I would trust Isky and not run VR1, even though a lot of people do. So that project completed. I feel like it's been a good summer. I changed from 373 gears to 456 gears, and while doing that, rebuilt the limited slip clutches and replaced all the bearings in the rear axle. And after that, I swapped the cam and swapped the intake from Edelbrock dual plane to the Edelbrock single plane. Obviously, as I talked about in the previous video, I lost a comp cam lifter and some amount of metal circulated through the engine. I'm confident that it was a minimal amount of damage, and what oil wasn't caught in the filter or on the drain plug or came out when I changed the oil will be caught in the filter this time around. I dropped a couple rare earth magnets in the filter and a couple more in the filter that I'm going to be putting on tomorrow. Now I know what I'm supposed to do. So when you lose a cam lobe, when you lose a lifter, you got to tear the whole motor down. That metal went through the bearings, through the oil galleys. I get that, okay? But I'm just not in the position right now to take the hoist over to my house, pull the Cleveland out of the car, tear it down, replace the bearings. I'm a college student. I just want the car to be running well enough throughout the school year. It'll get rebuilt in the future, don't get me wrong, but tearing the motor down right now is just not in the cards. We did everything that we could to minimize the damage. And again, it was only one lobe. It was only one lifter and one lobe. It was a very minimal amount of damage. I think if it had been 2 lobes, I would have thought hard about this and I would have said, yeah, it's probably in the best judgment to just tear it down. You know, arguably should have just torn it down right now. But again, you gotta do what you gotta do. Like, sometimes doing it the right way is just not right in that scenario. So you'll hear some of the car idling and you'll see how it runs, listen to it. It's an Isky hydraulic flat tappet with 565 lift and 280 duration. It's got 232 degrees of duration at 50 thousandths lift, and it's ground on a 110 lobe separation. I requested the 110 lobe separation angle versus a 108 for what they have it in the catalog as. Talking to the guys at Isky, I went with that decision to maintain power brakes and streetability. So yeah, it's going to be a good cam. I'm really happy with the new old stock lifters. And yeah, well, tomorrow we're going to change the oil, and then we're going to be upgrading the valve springs. So today when I was braking in the cam, I ran the old comp valve springs that I had on there that were, I don't remember the spring pressure offhand. They were good to 600 lift, but they didn't have enough spring pressure for this new cam. But for the break-in, they would work just fine, and they would be easier on the cam than the upgraded valve springs that I got. The upgraded ones I got were a trick flow part number, a single valve spring with enough spring pressure for this cam. The Isky part number that they recommended was a dual valve spring, and on the Cleveland you have to machine the seat for the spring, the inner seat near the valve guide, to accept a dual spring. And I mean, I can do that, but pulling both cylinder heads off is just more work. And I looked around and I found a set of single springs that are gonna accomplish that exact same goal. So I was really happy to be able to find that. So going forward with this Cleveland, it's got 456 gears, stick shift, the single plane intake, and this more aggressive cam. The one thing it's missing in that combination is a set of long tube headers. So right now I'm rocking the factory exhaust manifolds, and they're okay, don't get me wrong. They fit just great, but I've known for a long time that this car needs headers. So yeah, I got a set of Hooker competition headers sitting over there, and I had ran them on the car for about a couple of years until I swapped to the T5 manual transmission, and they just wouldn't clear the clutch cable. So the next project with this car is going to be sectioning out the tubes that don't fit and re-welding them to clear the clutch cable and the pitman arm. Those are the main two things that are going to be cause for interference. So that's going to be an exciting process. I'm going to get some mild steel 1 3/4 pipe, and we're going to gas weld those back together, and I'll bring you guys along for the ride. So right here next to me is my 460 big block that I picked up last weekend, and I've been tearing it down, share that process with you guys too. And I got some big plans for this guy. Looks like the oil wasn't changed for a long time, but it's in pretty darn good condition. The bores are virgin, but I don't think it's ever been bored out, and I cannot catch my fingernail on the ring ridge. So we're just gonna hone that and send it. The bearings all have copper showing, but the crankshaft is beautiful. I'll be bringing you guys along for the whole build of this engine. Right now we're just tearing it down, and we'll be cleaning things before I order any parts. In an effort to save money, I'm going to be sticking with the factory iron heads, porting those out as much as possible, and really just reusing as many parts as we can. But with blueprinting the block and really trying to improve everything we can, we're gonna be making some really healthy power numbers for this engine. This is a big mill, 460 cubic inches, heaviest engine I've ever worked on by far. The factory intake sucks. We're gonna get rid of that, obviously. Ideally, we would not be using the factory cylinder heads. They're pretty bad too. The ports are smaller than even the 2V Cleveland, I think. But we gotta work with what we got, right? Buying a set of aluminum cylinder heads really isn't financially viable for the average guy out there building motors. And whether that's Ford, Chevy, Mopar, guys are going to be working with the factory iron heads that came with the core. And so that being said, we are going to hog these babies out with a die grinder as much as we can, really focusing on the exhaust ports and the bowls to get these to flow as much as possible. On top of that, we're going to be using forced induction. Now again, in the interest of saving money, we have a power goal in mind, and to spin this thing to 7,000, 8,000 RPMs on the street for it to live, that's a lot of money. You know, these cylinder heads, they're not going to be making power at 7,000 RPMs. The factory rocker, they're not going to be making power at 7,000 RPMs. Like, that's just not in the cards for a budget build. But we're still going to be reaching our power goals, and we're going to be doing that with a big turbocharger. Yeah, so this is the 460, and I hope you guys stick around and stay tuned for the rest of this build. It's really going to be a fun one.